This program is brought to you by the Singapore Institute of International Affairs.
Every year, air pollution from plantation and forest fires in Indonesia affects the region and beyond. Although this problem has been recurring for more than 15 years, the haze has worsened recently. Singapore suffered its worst haze experience in June 2013 when the Pollutant Standards Index, or PSI, exceeded 400. That same week, Malaysia and Indonesia also recorded hazardous levels of air pollution. To address the haze problem in the broader context of the sustainable management of resources in the region, the Singapore Institute of International Affairs, or SIIA, organised the first Singapore Dialogue on Sustainable World Resources. It was held on 20th May 2014 at the Grand Hyatt Hotel. Thought leaders and industry experts shared their views and experiences on the theme, environment and growth, conflict or convergence. Offering Singapore's perspectives on the problem of transboundary haze was Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan, Minister for the Environment and Water Resources.
The root of our problems with transboundary haze is misaligned commercial interests. The reason companies will take shortcuts, will burn forests, will engage in unsustainable degradation of land, for instance, by draining peatland, is simply because the economics favors such behavior. You make more money from doing this. And the profits that you gain from engaging in such behavior accrue to you immediately. Although we say, and we were indeed adversely affected in Singapore, the worst victims were the local indigenous people living within or adjacent to those plantations. There is an urgent need for governments, for non-government organizations, and for local communities to insist on transparency, to collaborate more effectively on both short-term mitigation and long-term solutions, and there needs to be a political will to act, to investigate, to enforce, and to penalize. I'm very mindful that until and unless we give an advantage to companies which are more responsible, companies who are less responsible, who are not bound to high standards and accounts, will gain a head start. So it's not just a level playing field. We actually have to tilt the playing field in favor of those who are responsible. And this needs to be an international effort, and it needs to be based on facts and transparency.
Following his speech, the audience engaged the minister with their burning questions.
Which we use.
One of the questions is, the Singapore government, besides being, of course, a regulator, is also a purchaser of various supplies. Does Singapore have any plans or policies, like the Netherlands government, to pledge itself to source only, or at least a certain percentage, from sustainable, certified sources?
Well, this is a good point. So I once asked my staff, go to the supermarket and identify the products with palm oil. After a short while, they came back and said, it cannot be done. Virtually everything has palm oil, including, shock of shocks, Swiss chocolates have palm oil.
It's edible.
Right? Because it is edible vegetable oil. And then I met a planter who told me, look, if I take 1 hectare of land and I plant soya bean, or I take that same hectare and I plant palm oil, my yield in terms of vegetable oil is tenfold, So I think the point is that you can't avoid palm oil. The fact is, it is a very high-yielding good crop. But what we need to do, as you alluded to, is let's insist on traceability.
Mr. Agus Purnomo, Special Staff to the President for Climate Change in Indonesia, also shared the challenges faced by his government in tackling the fires and haze problem.
There is no silver bullet policy, nor magical instrument to prevent fires and haze, neither in implementing sustainable resource management. Maintenance of good governance and improved implementation of sustainable development require active participation of private sector and non-governmental entities. While government can set the goal of sustainable development with equity and provide incentive for good behavior with standards, with procedures, with regulations, putting hundreds of perpetrators into jail if they are setting off fire, and brought to court a dozen rogue companies, the private sectors need to continue fueling economy with skills and resources that will unlock the potential of our natural landscapes and the people who live in it. If we come back to the issue of fire and haze, the role of forestry and agricultural industries, as well as the traders, the bankers, consumer good manufacturers, are vital to alleviate poverty in fire-prone areas so that there won't be temptation to open more forests or open more peatlands and use fires to create plantations.
We're facing a transformational set of challenges and that require really a total rethink over the next 40 years of the way that our economy has worked successfully for the last 200.
The first Singapore Dialogue on Sustainable World Resources was organized by the Singapore Institute of International Affairs on 20th May. It brought together all major stakeholders from across the supply chain, resource and trade sectors to exchange ideas and consider solutions for sustainable development.
This dialogue hopes, ladies and gentlemen, to foster and focus consistent attention and cooperation. Haze is the bull's eye, but the wider issues of sustainability in the resource sector set the critical context. There are local environmental issues we mustn't forget, like deforestation. There are social issues of equity and land grabs. And there are wider economic issues of productivity and innovation so that resource countries can escape the resource curse and instead increase and share the benefits of this very rich sector.
During the one-day forum, eminent business figures and experts in sustainability and the environment took to the stage. They offered insights on how to encourage businesses, governments and non-governmental organizations or NGOs to do their part for long-term sustainable growth.
I believe in this century we face 6 major developmental challenges. The first is food security. The second is water security. The third is the impact of climate change. The fourth is energy security. The fifth is how do we build a new paradigm of sustainable, profitable growth without appropriating or depleting natural capital in a massive way as we are doing now. And finally, how do we reduce inequality in terms of finding inclusive growth? Most policymakers, governments, think tanks see each of these developmental challenges as separate silos. But really, nobody has really looked at integrating all of these problems because they're so closely linked together.
We aren't really facing an incremental set of challenges. We're facing a transformational set of challenges and that require really a total rethink over the next 40 years of the way that our economy has worked successfully for the last 200. And I think the most powerful concept is the circular economy. And actually that the heart of the circular economy is rethinking the paradigm of production and consumption over the last 200 years. And this linear cycle of production and consumption, the idea of take, make, and dispose. And actually rethinking that fundamentally to decouple growth from natural resource use and to find a way of doing more with less. And I'm pretty confident that we can do that. And I think you're seeing really interesting examples of companies now doing this. So what you see is BMW's engineers now redesigning parts in a BMW so that 60% can be refurbished or remanufactured at the end of life cycle, but also creating a marketing campaign that it's becoming cool to actually use those parts, you know, as you go through the life cycle of your own BMW and you need it repaired. And BMW will give you a 24-month warranty on those remanufactured, reused parts, and there are other examples.
Various stakeholders in the palm oil supply chain also shared their sustainable practices.
In 2010, we launched the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan, or the USLP, as we call it. Our vision is to double the size of our business while reducing our environmental footprint and increasing our positive social impact. Perhaps one of the most important commitments that we made is on reducing our environmental impact is also around sustainable sourcing. By 2020, we've said we will source 100% of our agricultural raw materials sustainably. Just a few years ago, we were consuming 7.5 million tons of agricultural raw materials. And by 2013, we have achieved 48% of these being sourced sustainably. Significantly, 100% of palm oil, a key raw material for us, was sourced sustainably by the end of 2012.
So what we did at the end of December last year, in December, was to announce our own policy with three main pillars of no deforestation, no peat development, and no exploitation. We didn't do this due to the pressure of NGOs, as some would have you believe. We did it because we saw the deterioration in the environment in many countries and changes in the global climate, and we felt that something needed to be done and that big corporates have to take the lead and work together as never before.
Several speakers highlighted the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil, or RSPO, as a key driver for transforming the palm oil industry.
In Sime Darby, we have actually a vision, which is developing sustainable futures. And this vision actually is translated down because we have actually quite a lot of committees. So basically, whatever directions that's set at the top is actually taken down right to the lower level. And of course, the RSPO certifications really help. Right now, 97% of our strategic operating units, that is the mill and several estates, a strategic operating unit, that is 97% have been certified. So basically, when you go for certification, you will do a lot of trainings. You will do a lot of engagement with the workers. So basically, that's how we embed sustainability.
We've got 14,000 smallholders, and they're RSPO certified as well. 2 of them are in the room today. When we embrace this concept of certification, sustainability and certification within our business, they wanted to be part of it because they wanted to improve their operation. They felt that this concept of being good members in their community was an important part of it. As a company, we market their sustainability certificates separately. We share the premiums with them so they get some financial benefits. They have used those premiums to help educate their organization. So this is a group of smallholders that 20 years ago would have been at the lower end of the poverty chain, have struggled to get themselves established, and now they're leaders in their community and serve as good examples for other smallholders throughout Indonesia.
Speakers from NGOs and resource sectors voiced their aspirations for sustainable growth.
We would like to see full protection of peatland. This is something is really important. And then the extension of the moratorium with the the extended of the coverage of the moratorium is really important to see. Not only covering primary forest but also natural forests. And then the business more and more coming for the no deforestation commitment in the whole of supply chains, not only, but including also, for example, financial sector. And I can tell you, no deforestation, growing business with no deforestation is something possible in this region.
We are very much interested in conservation, in protecting forests, in protecting peatland. And we have done that. And in the process, created jobs for 90,000 people, give them a better way of life, access to better health, school, education. And in the process, we have improved their life. Going forward, we are going to further increase our commitment in terms of conservation area to the extent of 1-to-1 ratio, plantable versus conservation areas.
There's no conflict between growth and environment if we set out to manage it well, and we as intermediaries in the financial industry have a big role to play.
During the final panel session at the Singapore Dialogue on Sustainable World Resources, speakers from the banking sector discussed ideas and highlighted the importance of responsible financing of the agroforestry sector. They shared how Singapore, as a regional hub for investment and finance, could influence the developments on sustainability within ASEAN.
There's no conflict between growth and environment if we set out to manage it well, and we as intermediaries in the financial industry have a big role to play. We have an environmental and social risk policy that's built into Citi's view of the businesses and the loans we make, and that's built on our participation in the Equator Principle, which we've been a signatory to for many years now. I don't know if many of you know about the Equator Principles, but they are just that, principles that help guide assessment of big project financing around the world, and they look at social risk, environmental risk, and you need project financing for big projects like oil refineries, but also for other long-term projects, dams, infrastructure, whatever they may be.
We've been a member of the RSPO since its inception. Within our agricultural commodities policy, which at the moment is really focused on palm oil, we will apply this to growers, to planters, to refiners, and to traders. They must be members of the RSPO by the end of June this year. They must have one of their operations certified by the end of this year. So that could be a mill and its plantation base, or it could be one of their refineries. And they must have all of their global operations certified by the RSPO by the 31st of December 2018. We consider the RSPO to be the minimum acceptable standard for our palm oil customers. Going forwards, we are also looking at how we can incentivize the growing and trading of CSPO, Certified Sustainable Palm Oil.
There was a question that came in just from the current panel, and I'll open this to anyone on the panel who might have an idea. Should financial institutions actively incentivize startups and companies of that nature to look at some sustainable business practices or the sustainable industry in and of itself? Is it something that financial institutions should start to get to the forefront of?
I mean, I'll answer that by, we've sort of said yes, in as much as within our new policies, we have some clear guidance for startups. Let's take an example of a startup palm oil company or a startup palm oil refinery. They may not be able to get certification on day one, but our relationship managers within our banks, should be speaking to our individual customers and clients, explaining, if in our case, what our policy is, what our policy will commit them to do within certain timeframes.
I'll add to that and say that typically when we look at case studies of this nature, we encourage these startups or new businesses to partner with NGOs that we believe are consistent, and essentially the NGOs will act as a measurement and verification tool, right? To see that these businesses are, do tick the boxes, do follow that.
Just two questions. What about companies that are linked to governments? They call it GLCs, and sometimes it's really difficult to handle them because they've got government interests in those companies, and they will be pushing for financial institutions to back up all their projects. And how do you handle these kind of cases? My second question is, what do you do? Is there any punitive measures for those companies who, in the process of conducting their projects, then along the line they fail to adhere? Do you have an exit clause? Do you stop the financial help, and that's it?
Irrespective of whether you are an SME or a large corporate or a semi-government, you will need to abide by our policies if you wish to bank with HSBC. And whilst there may be practicalities involved with that, certainly we would implement our policies as they have been written and are intended to be applied.
If we identify clients who are in breach of our policies, and when they have clearly undertaken or committed to us that they would not, they would be responsible in some way or not do the footprint, then we would absolutely exit that. We have, quite a few live examples of those instances, and I think that's pretty, we're pretty consistent in how we apply it.
Associate Professor Simon Tay, Chairman of the Singapore Institute of International Affairs, brought the day's discussions to a close.
Ladies and gentlemen, beginning now and working cooperatively and consistently in the years ahead, we hope to make a positive contribution to sustainability, to help both the companies who want to move in this direction as well as the environment. And on the specific and difficult issue of the haze, we advocate to end the haze by sustainable resources. I really want to thank those who made specific commitments to sustainability, and to encourage others to follow the example. The SWI, which I chair, the think tank that's organizing dialogue, will also make our commitments. Our first commitment is that we will convene a meeting in probably October or November this year with the NGOs and other experts to help monitor efforts on the haze, specifically on the haze, rather than just the broader sustainability. Second, our commitment is that we will work with others towards establishing a website to make the emerging information and possibly relevant and reliable maps publicly available. And this is something that I think the Minister in some ways called for, that transparency must be increased in this area. We plan that this dialogue will grow in the coming years to encourage corporations and all of us here to change our outlooks and move to sustainability in the production, purchase, trade and finance, and of course, the consumption of resources in our region. Thank you.
This program was brought to you by the Singapore Institute of International Affairs and proudly supported by the following partners.
Catch the encore telecast of this program at these times or at your own time at channelnewsasia.com/TV.